Every teacher has had a moment where conflict blows up in their classroom and nothing they reach for works. But the moment of conflict was already set in motion months before it exploded. I'm Ryan Barcega Castro-Harris, all five names for all the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. This is the second episode of a series on what it takes to actually build a restorative classroom. This video is about why community has to come before conflict. It's a structural requirement, not a best practice someone put in a handbook. If you skip it, the most important tools in a restorative justice practice won't work when you need them the most. If you tuned in for the last episode, you already know those tools. If you didn't, you can go back, but this one also stands on its own. By the end of this, you'll know exactly why community has to come first and what building it actually looks like in a real classroom with real students. So let's get into it. Community gets built through practice, and practice requires time, which means the window that matters the most is the one most teachers treat as setup before anything goes wrong. Activation makes everything harder, but there's something else at work too. When students actually belong to a community, they show up to hard moments differently. It changes their ability to navigate harm. Crisis is harder without community, but belonging does something before crisis ever arrives. It changes how student shows up every day, not just when something goes wrong. Belonging reduces behavioral issues. When a student feels like they belong in a room, they have something to protect. They have relationships worth maintaining, agreements that they helped write, a community that they're a part of, and acting out in that room costs them something real. Not a consequence assigned by an adult, but the actual social cost of harming people they're in relationship with. That's a different kind of deterrent than a referral to the office. When a student doesn't feel like they belong, none of that is true. The room is just a place they're required to be. The rules are someone else's. The relationships aren't substantial. There's nothing to protect and nothing to lose. So the calculation about whether to act out is purely about whether an adult will catch them and what happens if they do. That's a much weaker restraint, and it fails the moment a student decides that the cost isn't worth it. You don't need a study to see this. Teachers see it every year. The student who is failing and disruptive in a room where they didn't feel like anyone knew anything about them beyond their name and grade becomes a totally different kid when they're in a room where they feel like someone cares about them. And the only thing that changed is whether the conditions made belonging possible for them. Belonging isn't a soft outcome, and a classroom where students feel known, where their voice shaped the culture, where relationships were built on purpose, handles conflict very differently because students involved have something that they don't want to lose. Belonging changes how students show up every day, but it also changes something specific about how they respond when an adult corrects them. Belonging changes how students show up, but there's something more specific happening when a trusted adult corrects a kid versus when a stranger does. Trust changes how students respond to correction. When the student knows that the adult correcting them actually cares about them, it doesn't guarantee that the moment will go well. The kid still might be having a hard day. They might be carrying something that walked in with them before class started. They might hear a word or tone that lands wrong for some reason that the teacher doesn't know or can't anticipate, and none of that gets solved by relationships. But when a student knows that a teacher has invested in them and cares about them and has shown up for them, they're a lot more likely to hear the correction as care than as an attack. When the moment does blow up anyway, trust is what makes repair possible afterward. The correction doesn't have to be the end of something, it becomes something you come back from together because the relationship was there before it happened and it's still there after. In a room where trust was built on purpose, the door always stays open. Not always in the moment, but down the line because there's a foundation to return to, a history to draw on, and a reason for the student to believe that the adult is on their side. The investment in a relationship doesn't guarantee that the moment goes well, but it does guarantee that there's something to come back to after. Trust changes what's possible after connection, but relationship does something else too. It surfaces what's actually going on with the student before it becomes a crisis. Trust changes what's possible after correction, but relationship does something before correction ever becomes necessary. It gives you information early enough to actually do something with it. Proactive relationship building allows you to identify and address needs before they become crises. A student who's struggling doesn't usually announce it. They act out. They go quiet. They stop turning things in, or they start showing up late, or they pick fights with kids they used to get along with. A genuine check-in at the start of class can reveal that a kid hasn't slept in 2 days. A hallway conversation can reveal that things at home have gone bad again. A note scribbled in the margins of an assignment can reveal that a student is carrying something they don't have words for yet. And when you're attentive, you notice that a kid who's usually loud has gone quiet for 3 days, and following up on that can reveal something no one else in the building knew. Having multiple channels to connect gives you the information you need to actually respond to what's going on with a student, not just the behavior that's visible on the surface. Addressing the needs of a student who's falling behind in October is a very different situation than addressing the needs of the same kid in March. When the situation has compounded and absences have stacked up, the options have narrowed. Relationships create the conditions where students can tell you things early because they trust that telling you will lead somewhere other than a referral. The earlier you know, the more you can do. For some students, that's the difference between getting support and falling through the cracks entirely. Relationships surface needs early and changes what support is possible. But there's one more thing community does before conflict arrives, and it's the thing that makes accountability possible when harm actually happens. Relationships surface needs early, but all of this, the relationships, the belonging, the trust, the early intervention, it's also building something else. It's building the conditions where accountability can actually function. Strong communities make accountability possible. When harm happens in a room where community was never built, the options are limited. You can remove the student, assign a consequence, send them to the office. You cannot ask a student to be accountable to a community that they were never a part of. Accountability requires relationship. It requires that the person who caused harm actually cares about the people they hurt, that they have something real to repair, that the community they're being asked to return to is one they want to be in. Without that, accountability is just punitive enforcement with dressed up language. A strong community changes what's possible after harm. When a student causes harm in a room where they helped write the agreements, where they know the people they hurt, where they've been in check-ins and circles with those people for months, the question of repair lands differently. It's not abstract, it's personal. The harm they caused wasn't about breaking a rule, it was damaging something real that they were a part of building. This is also what makes the process survivable for the people who were harmed. Being asked to sit in a room with a person who hurt you is an enormous thing to ask of anyone. It's only worth asking if the community around the process is strong enough to hold both people through it. A room full of relationships built on purpose, agreements everyone owns, a teacher who belongs to the community, that's what makes it possible to do the hard work of repair without it becoming traumatizing. The relationships, the belonging, the trust, the early identification of needs, that's the infrastructure that makes a restorative classroom function when it matters the most. That's what a restorative classroom is built on. And if community is so important, the question worth sitting with is why so many schools who attempt to do restorative justice lead with behavior management instead. If this landed for you, drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and get tapped into more intentional learning like this at amplifyrj.com. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease, and may you work for a world where that can be possible for everyone. Peace.